Setting up. And we're live. So, hi guys, and welcome back to Brain-Friendly Thinking. Today, I am joined by Categorizing again, and we're going to continue discussing uh, our our thinking tools book that we're planning. Just for those of you who haven't, oops, sorry. Just for those of you who haven't seen the last live stream last week, here is. I just very briefly want to walk you through what we discussed last time. So first of all, the idea of the Thinking Tools book was to create a book that is very action focused, that gives you a bit of a background, that gives you a bit of an overview of why thinking tools and how thinking tools work, but really focuses on problems and what problems you can solve with that. Last time I started introducing the idea of if you're walking from what is known to you, what you're familiar with, into what is unknown, how you can proceed with that, and that there's a lot of, well, first of all, that you need to recognize concepts, that concepts make it easier for you to think about a certain topic. And I gave the example of the chess players for who the standard formation of the chess pieces, they are like a closed concept rather than individual pieces on the board. And that those concepts, they seem to be connected into some sort of framework. I actually, for a very long time, I walked through one example where I lost track of what I actually wanted to say for a little bit, but in the end, we got back to what type of tools there are, and we had a bit of a discussion and a back and forth in what would be useful. And based on that, Karthik, in the past week, you obviously also showed something, and you also wrote and sketched something while you were speaking, and you took what we arrived at last time and structured that a little bit more, and you had some ideas on where we can take the book. So if you would like to start there, and then let's discuss and see where the discussion leads us.
Sounds good. Thanks, Martin. Yes, so I think we had as quite a rich discussion the last time, and I think it's what we sort of said was we will probably go over these things a few times as we make sense of it ourselves. So the first thing that came out, quite at the end of the last session, was a sort of cycle, a process that we go through. So typically, we have this idea of there is kind of a flux of interacting events and circumstances. There's stuff all around us. We have essentially information that we're exposed to. Now, as individuals, then, how do we make sense of this? So, we're starting off with this information, these kind of sense impressions, whatever else is coming at us. We tend to talk our way through things. So to try and explain something like we're doing now, we'll start by trying to articulate elements of these that we think are relevant and important. And that's kind of the starting point for most people to make sense of anything, whether it's a new concept, in a lecture, somebody's going to taught you something, you want to understand it, well, you're going to talk your way through it. If you experience something and you're not quite sure what it was, you'll talk your way through it. Again, so talking is a very central way for us to start to make sense of any kind of information or input coming our way. So that's kind of the typical second stage. Now, I think what we're arguing in this project is it's helpful to have tools that help you also externalize that information and make sense of it. You know, in terms of articulating the information, like you said the last time around concepts, being able to list out the concepts, and then maybe also look at the connections between concepts and see how they're related to each other. That's a big part of, you know, using tools as a way to help us make sense of these situations. So this third step really is kind of the big focus of our own conversation. So once you've done this, typically you can formalize that articulation in something a little more concrete. So words are a big part of this, whether it's a paper, some kind of, you know, article, something that starts to take that thinking and move it just from a diagrammatic form into something that is a bit more organized and structured and formal. And then finally, in terms of actually taking this information, you know, we might sort of collate that in a book, we might construct our traditional kind of information pieces as we go along. And that's when we actually publish something. So there's this cycle of starting off with information, with whatever's coming at us. And I think this is where, this is the thing we'll dig into a little bit more in our conversation. Starting to articulate it. You know, our claim is using tools will help us do that better and come up with something that's a more formal structuring of what we're thinking, which eventually can be published and put together in a form that we share with others. So that's a cycle that we're going through. It's a cycle that we're going to experience as we try and create this book in the first place. You know, that's exactly what we want to try and show. So then I think once we recognized that we were going through this, it made sense to, well, one of the potential things we could do is have the structure of our book follow the structure of this process. You know, we step through these things turn by turn. Again, we haven't necessarily decided that. It just seemed like at the end of the last conversation, this could be a useful way for us to talk about how we introduce our tools. And so to start then with this first kind of section, this fuzzy section in here, I thought an entry point, we actually talked about this in our last conversation as sort of a continuation between what is known and what is unknown. So we had this kind of transition that we talked about briefly, and I thought if we take this and maybe formalize it a little bit more into again, you know, just as a bit of a thought structure, in the right place, as a 2x2 matrix for the purpose of the discussion. Please. Okay, so if we maybe think of these topics as the things that are known or perhaps, you know, familiar to us, and then the things that are unfamiliar or unknown. Again, I'm just trying to figure out the right words here as we think through these things. And then a second section here is whether it is structured information or unstructured. So it's probably worth just stepping through these boxes a little bit and just explaining maybe how each of these might work. And then I thought we could talk about perhaps how tools could relate to these areas as part of our discussion. So if I think about something that is known and familiar, or known or familiar or structured, this is a bit like, you know, somebody stepping up to give a lecture. If they're coming in to do a 1-hour lecture with a set of slides, they don't just make it up on the spot. Typically, they only have a structure, and it's a known kind of piece of information. So typically here we are presenting information. It's known, it's familiar, it's structured. We present what we have done. If something is structured, but it's unfamiliar, so this is a situation perhaps a student is listening to a lecture, then we are, you know, something already exists. A structure of knowledge already exists. People have an outline, and the presenter has an outline they're going through. Here, what we're sort of doing is uncovering the structure. We're uncovering the information. Now, if something is familiar, but unstructured. So this might be to do a lot with tacit knowledge, things that we know how to do. We've done this for a long time, but we never sat down to think about exactly how we do it. What's the process we follow? We understand what we're doing, and that seems like it's a process of analysis. And then finally, we have something that's unfamiliar or unknown, or we're sort of reaching into something that we aren't fully conscious of yet. We're also looking at this information in an unstructured format. So we now have to make sense of it. And that seems like a process of construction. We are constructing potentially a representation or a structure to hold that information. And so where I was thinking about, and I think again, we talked in the last session about something like, say, a cargo, which when we ran into a bit of trouble as we tried to say, well, what is it, this or that? We're trying to find a certain way. How does it relate to other kinds of tools? And I think the purpose of this matrix is not to say a tool sort of fits here or here and it's exclusive. I think it's more about how you use a tool to do this or do that, and how do you use a tool to analyze information or construct something new. And I think that's maybe the direction in which that may be useful framing for us to look at each tool and perhaps kind of go, how does this relate to our entry point in terms of the situation we're in? Is it known or structured, or is it unfamiliar and unstructured? And that might help us select a tool and use it in a way that is clear about where we're trying to go. So that's hopefully a bit of a summary of where we got to the end of last session and a starting point to where we could have the discussion this time.
Yeah, I quite like your matrix there. I think it not only covers a lot of what we talked about last time, but also the general, how can I say that, but generally about the problem. And just looking at that and listening to you, I do notice that I'm very good at what you call constructing, like charging into unfamiliar territory that's unstructured and try to somehow make sense of it. But what's much harder for me is what you called analysis. So getting tacit knowledge and structuring it in a way that I can easily present it to other people. I personally noticed that if I'm talking to somebody, if I actually have to teach somebody, that forces me to do the analysis, but I'm often do it as I'm teaching that other person. So I'm thinking at the same time, and I might do false starts, and I might realize that I forget something and go back and so on and so forth. When I try to do it by myself, then it very often gets stuck in the analysis phase and never come up with a structure to actually present it. It's not directly related to our book, but it's just an interesting observation. I thought I wanted to share that.
Well, I think that's an interesting observation, because it does kind of illuminate the purpose of why we do either of these things. I think in each of these cases, uncovering, constructing, analysis, we're trying to move towards the situation where we can present what we're trying to do.
Yes.
That I think has to be the logic.
I think that there are a lot of YouTube channels that are for autodidacts or for people who want to pass exams, so who are currently in formal education. So I think there are a lot of YouTube channels that are actually dealing with the uncovering bit and moving the uncovering bit to the unfamiliar structure to the known or the familiar structured. And I think I don't know whether unique selling point is the right word, but our unique angle is that we are trying to cover the right part of your matrix, the construct and the analysis. And I think that's currently underserved, actually. It's there are a couple of other things. So let's first. I'm just sort of gushing out the associations that are coming to my mind. They are not necessarily structured. They are not really necessarily important, but I just want to get them out of my mind and see what comes of them. Um, I don't think we talked about this on the live stream, but after the live stream, we had a little bit of a discussion among ourselves and how to divide up the books. Well, first of all, when we got into this whole live stream, when we thought about the live stream, the first two live streams, we were thinking about one big thinking book about everything. And I think it was you who made the suggestion that potentially we could even split the book into two books. One that is about uh, actually making sense of new information, moving from the known to the unknown, and the other one is to get what is known to get into publication. So from your matrix, it seems to map very well onto the constructing and the analysis bit.
Yeah, I think this diagram was sort of that point wasn't about the initial bit was how do we make sense of it,
Mhm.
and then the second bit was how do we then, present it or publish it.
Mhm.
So
Yes. I wrote down some more keywords while you were speaking. Um, oh yes, the talking. Just some things that some associations had, because at the beginning you talked about talking, that when we're presented with another stream of information, we are we tend to talk about it. Actually, let me just very briefly also share my thing again. And because what I noticed is, yeah, sorry everybody. Okay. What I noticed is that um, the talking. Oh yeah, that's some thinking tools. They're actually very close to talking. One of them is journaling. And you can do journaling in several different ways. So usually it's used as in psychology. If you have a problem, you write about this. If you or you have gratefulness journaling, or you want to remember something. But you can also do journaling as in when I move from the known to the unknown, when everything is unfamiliar, unstructured, um, and I want to make sense of that. And actually, even when you're not only when you're doing constructing, but also when you're doing analyzing, you can just start with a sheet of paper and just write down whatever comes to your mind. I'm actually doing that a lot. That is one of the thinking tools that come most naturally to me. That I just start and just start with a sentence like, okay, uh, what is this all about? Okay, what do I know? What's going through my head? Something like that, and then write down every O and M and everything, single thing that comes to my mind. There's also the talking bit. That is something that's it's a nice anecdote from when I did my bachelor. When I did my dissertation project, we had to present our intermediate results to our supervisor, and we had to write everything up. We had something like a mock viva, and as I was doing that, I got really stuck. I didn't know. It was sort of like everything was in my head, everything was tacit. I knew what I was doing, I knew what I had read, but it was really hard for me to compress it onto the page. And I just so happened to bump into one of my course mates, and I told them that I have these problems, and he was like, "Okay, let's sit down and let's talk about this. Just tell me about what you're doing." And I told him, and then he started to ask questions. So if I understand that correctly, you mean this and you mean that. And I think this is you can use that as a thinking tool in its own right. It is very close to what you described as we naturally tend to want to talk about something that we don't know. So yeah, it's as I said, what I'm talking about is not necessarily going anywhere, just something that I would like to mention. Then, and I thought it was sorry, yeah.
Just
Go
to
on.
jump in on that particular point, I think you mentioned journaling. I think
Hmm.
what you described there about talking your way through a problem is also a bit like blogging. So a lot of
Hmm.
my blog, I think, has been a bit like that, where I've not talked to somebody, but I've talked it out on paper as a way to kind of understand maybe a particular kind of idea. So talking doesn't
Yes.
always have to be with somebody else. It can be almost
Yes.
talking to yourself on paper, is I think what you're describing to some extent. But it's more than
Yeah,
a
and
word. It's actual conversation on paper with the idea.
I noticed something very similar when at the end of last year, beginning of this year, I did the other live stream that I abandoned because it was like too deep for this channel. Even though most of the time nobody was actually listening, just the fact that there was a camera in front of me and as a second very important condition that I was not trying to make a polished video, that I was just doing a live stream that somehow gave me the liberty to just talk. I also found that that helped me actually a lot to develop my ideas. And I was thinking of setting up a second channel where I'm only doing that, where I'm not even trying to gain any audience. If somebody finds me, it's great. If nobody finds me, it's also great. But just showing up and doing this type of thinking live on camera because that actually helped me a lot. And yes, I said I have problems with the analysis part if I'm doing it on my own. But if I'm talking to somebody, then it suddenly becomes much easier. I don't know why.
It's interesting because actually, having seen some of your videos, um, I would have actually said that in some of the examples that you've put, what you are doing is analysis more than construction, especially in the ones where you start with an existing book or content. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember there's two examples, I think. One was where I think you used ABC list to reconstruct your knowledge
Hmm.
about an Egyptian kind of scenario, wasn't it? I think it was
Hmm.
a certain location, and I think you also went through a book and used those lists to work it through. I think there, because you're breaking down an existing piece of knowledge, that would count as, so it's, I guess, it's uncovering information. So to some extent, you could argue it's uncovering it. But I think as you move into the connections between things, it does move a bit more towards analysis. I think that the
Hmm.
analysis is about the engagement. If so, I think one of the reasons why, and if I take my screen back, maybe it is worth categorizing some tools at this point.
Hmm.
One of the reasons why I was thinking about this structure is because of the entry point. So I started off. So there's a large community who work on sketch notes. So sketch notes is a term invented by Mike Rody, and he's written a book on that. And there's a large community of sketch noters.
Hmm.
And the idea with a sketch note is you go in, you listen to a lecture, and then rather than taking traditional linear notes, you create a diagram, you create a drawing. But as I said since at the start, that knowledge already exists. A speaker doesn't speak without a structure. So what you do with a sketch note is you create a structure. You sort of draw, for example, it has lots of visual elements. You draw a heading, and your little buckets of information with like bullet points to kind of look for the key bits, and it might connect to something else. So there's a whole range of visual features where you might kind of have something that's really important. So Sketchnote has these visual aspects, and I use them quite heavily in my MBA to take what the lecturer was saying and put maybe 3 hours lectures onto a single page so I could see a structure. But I do think that a sketch note, by the nature of its term, by the note section to some extent,
Hmm.
it is taking something that exists and putting it into a form that you can that helps you make sense. So it is kind of uncovering what's going on. So on the other hand, if you do even something as simple as taking a concept. So if I take your the Kawa type stuff, right, and we sort of say we have a concept, and that concept we can have a bunch of things coming off it, where there's the key things that relate to that idea. That to me feels closer to analysis, because that didn't exist in that form before. You took a whole set of ideas that you had an ABC list, for example, and you picked the most important ones or the most relevant ones and tried to put them into a structure that meant you create a more memorable from it. It was trying to almost like distill or boil away the excess. You come to a very clear, one particular set of clear idea. And I think that's very different from the sketch note kind of approach, where this creates a structure, it uncovers a structure, and then you do create something, but at the end of it, you've recreated this existing structure. With analysis, I think you end up with something a little bit new, potentially. You add some new information, new connections, or you go deeper than what is already in front of you,
Yes.
in terms of structure. Now, there are hard and fast rules, but the specific reason why I think that the sketch notes, the way that they traditionally are, is about, uncovering existing structured information, is because when you move into this area and you start to use them to construct information, I would, the term for sketch notes is rich pictures. That's the older term that's been used since, maybe the 80s as a concept noir to describe a similar kind of pictorial representation. But this has more to do, this has kind of more associated with it. It's not just an uncovering structure, it's actually, it has elements of systems thinking in there. So you are, the ideas of emergence. We can go into this in more detail later, but it's connected with a series of thinking around systems, which means you have boundaries, connections, you have, the idea of like a whole, and then emergence. There's all these systems concepts that are related to the rich picturing kind of approach. And then where this relates into my own work on rich notes is that I don't think that is often used when you're trying to cover existing structure. It's often used in this construction phase of new information. So it's all these kind of links between what exists and how we use these particular tools in these contexts, which people I think get stuck about, because they go, well, we know how to use this tool, so it must be good for all four phases. I think it can be. This is one of the things about tools. No one tool is better. You can use a sketch note or a Kaga or a rich picture or a rich note. The important thing probably is being very good at using it and knowing how to use it in these contexts. So one of the things that we just probably need to think about is, we're not saying one tool is better than everything else. We're just trying to understand what the tools are, show how they can be used, and then perhaps for the user kind of go, your tool may struggle as it goes into one of these areas, and you might need to adapt the tool with these principles, or perhaps change the tool in the way you think about it, depending on kind of where you are.
I think, yeah, I think everything you said is great, is the right direction. When you talked about, you talked about analysis. That's, I would like to add something to what you said there, because you said cover as an important tool, which I completely agree with. There was also when you talked through all of this, when you talked through your matrix, that was the first thing that came into my mind. The cover is really good for analysis. It's less good for constructing, I think. And I think there are a couple of other tools. Anything to do with creating any form of ranking is really good for analysis. Any sort of ranking where in the end you have, I don't want to use the word objectivity, but what I mean is that I can always create a ranking, but there is some sort of maybe permanence that the same rule they can be applied again. There's some reason for why these rules exist, and they are not just rules for the moment that are discarded the next time we do the ranking. Anything to do with this is, I think, good, very good for analysis. And you mentioned that, well, this sort of sits in the middle, but you did mention too that from an ABC list you extract the most important concepts and then put them into a carver. And this most important concept, it's not a full ranking, but it contains element of a ranking, because in order to select the most important ones, you need to have you at least need to have some criteria by which you can say, well, I can't say which of them is necessarily the best. I know all of them, they are in some way better or more relevant than all these other words, other concepts. And also, I'm not sure what you can call it. Let me call it subsetting, which is a term from data analysis. When you take a big data list and you extract a smaller data frame or data list from that subsetting, which would not necessarily, I guess, creating a carver in that way, as you described, is a form of subsetting, but you can also create another list from by subsetting. You have a very big ABC list, and then you create another ABC list, or not necessarily ABC list, but just a list of concepts that are relevant, that are salient, but you keep them as a list. You could also do something like that. Yeah, so this is, the more I think about this, these are all very good tools for analysis. There is something you can gradually move from constructing to analysis, and I think you showed a very nice example of that today, because last week we was very much into exploring everything, both of us, and you using your rich notes to think through things. But what you shown today, and part of what you just drew are rich notes again, but I mean rich notes in the constructing sense of the word. I must be careful with what does the rich note represents, how it looks like, what you're actually doing, or the purpose it is. But so the rich notes for constructing, but what can be seen on the right side of your screen. This is something, yeah, where you talk about the known, unknown, the little squiggly line, and then talking through that tools. This is something that you clearly thought about before and that you were presenting today as a partial or an intermediate result maybe. So this is something where you now use a very similar technique in terms of what it actually contains, namely some pictures with, well, in this case, they are numbers and then some arrows among them, but which are used as a form of analysis. You could take, we probably going to refine that over time, but at some point we can take that and put this into a book and then say, if you look at figure whatever it will be, you see da 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 da, and then we can talk through that. So yeah, this is exactly what you said before. A tool, or most tools, they won't sit neatly in one category. They will sit in, you can use them for different purposes. Some tools might be more narrow, but most tools, I think you can use them for several different purposes, which in fact could create a matrix all of its own. I'm not sure whether that's a useful matrix, but you can have one axis where you write the purpose, and then another axis where you write the let's call that the content or the form of the tool. And then you have, for your purpose, you have what was uncovering was the one in the top left, right? Uncovering, thank you. Then construct, analysis, and presentation. And for the time being, I will just write the I will. This is actually not good what I'm doing, but I can't think of anything else right now. So I'm just gonna write. I hope this is. You can sort of see that. Okay, this is rich nodes. Then you would have Carver. You would have ABC. You would have different other types. You have but maybe journaling and so on. This is why the reason why I say this is bad is this is not actually what I want to express. What I would really like to have on this axis, or maybe there will be several axes on top of each other, would be something like, is it graphical or is it textual? Is it is it um, is it creating a hierarchy? Is it condensing? Is it condensing or subsetting? Is it structuring? I guess that's another word where we need to be careful because all of that is structuring in a way, but where you structure elements in relation to one another. So is it relating? Maybe that's the better word. And then once you fill that out, you would actually end up with maybe rich nodes in one or maybe in several of those boxes, Carver in another box, and so on and so forth. And then you can say, okay, well, that sort of gives us a mapping, doesn't it? I just write Carver somewhere in here now, and maybe it's over here as well. Let's cross all of those out. And then you have maybe journaling, and then you could we really need to think about this. We really need to think about this axis or collection of axes here. But you could use something like that as a decision aid. If you're not sure what you want to use or what you could use, or you want to extend your usage, you could go through, okay, what is it I'm currently trying to do? And then go through these axes and say, okay, these are the tools I might want to try to use for what I'm trying to do. Yeah, just an idea.
I think it's something we have to consider about. So for example, there is this kind of temptation, which I sort of had with my matrix as well, to also create like a crossword puzzle type approach and say, well, do all these things fit into my jigsaw or into my crossword, which I think
Yes.
is the temptation with that particular way of ordering the information. It's kind of standard analysis. At the same time, so there's a book called Drawing on the Back of the Napkin by Dan Rome, I think. Again, one of those books that took me into the visual thinking thing early in my journey. So, I mean, it's certainly worth reading. So it's drawing on the back of the napkin. At the end of the book, it has, I think, quite an extensive matrix type structure. So it sort of has a series of diagrams and charts and so on, but like that. You end up with like 10 different things. or more, whatever. And the idea is you sort of situation and a tool, and therefore you can select what kind of happens. The only thing that this does, I feel, is it leads to cognitive overwhelm, because you have to now think about the situation, the intersection between the tool and the situation, and then you have to kind of reach for it. So I think for me, this has the potential. I've never used this actual matrix to make a decision. I've seen it, it looks pretty, and I think it's great in a book, but I've never actually reached for it to go, what should we do? The alternative, so there's a famous, I think, Bruce Lee quote that says, I don't fear the person who has learned 1,000 techniques, once. I fear the person who's used one technique 1,000 times. So then you have this other thing, which is, okay, actually, here is a thing. So if I take rich notes as an example, I'm still kind of find the boundaries of what rich notes are and trying to articulate that, because this is obviously part of my PhD sort of work. But there are sort of open questions around, is rich notes a container where you can use lots of techniques? You can use, thinking tools in there, for example. Maybe you can use the Carver type stuff inside the containers. Is rich notes simply a container on an infinite screen where you can use lots of techniques within them? So that's one kind of approach. Does it have something to do with the graphics, or the letters? Is it that actually there's kind of, in rich picturing, there's more pictures and less text, perhaps, we're arguing it. Is the fact that actually I have more writing in rich notes that makes it a rich note as opposed to whatever. So that's another way of doing it. What we have, so again, with my research colleagues, what we have thought about in terms of rich notes, what differentiates rich notes, perhaps the most important thing is that it's rhizomatic. And so the rhizome is a term which is kind of used in different areas. Most well known is these French philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari's use in terms of talk about rhizomatic as different from, so hierarchy. Tree is hierarchical. Every branch breaks into other branches, and you kind of have at the end of it a leaf. So hierarchy, I think you sort of talked about briefly. That's one way of structuring information. Rhizomes are different in that they're like ginger's rhizome. It grows along the ground. Different parts can shoot and create different things. It sort of has this structure that is interconnected and entangled. But there's a very different plant structure to a tree. Rather than this arborescent tree structure, it is this thing that moves across the ground, is underground. Burrows are rhizomes, the way they connect and interact. So the rich notes, the key kind of contribution is perhaps that it's not pre-structured, in that there is an existing structure in place that we're kind of using to map something out. It is this rhizomatic thing that grows, and you can see even as we talk, it's growing because it's on a big page. We have elements in here which are, models that might be more rich pictures or diagrams, and we have matrices, but they are growing within this overall structure of rich notes. So I reach for this tool as my default because I'm experienced it, I've used it a lot, it's my preferred starting point. But to use it effectively, I need to know other tools and know when to bring them into the mix. So where I'm going with this is, okay, but if you're an individual who wants to do something, there are blockers. One of the blockers is this is design primary. You can see it works best in a digital screen on an infinite canvas. So you have to have the tools and the ability to do this in the first place. That creates a bit of a barrier to entry into kind of using this approach. So somebody might say, well, actually, hang on a second, I'd like to use paper. That's my preferred approach. I know I can do that. Or I'm actually in a situation where I'm running workshops and work with lots of people. I actually want them to do more of the work. So the context might mean that for these individuals, it might be better to have tools that are that have diagrammatic or existing structures in place that they kind of, go towards. But they can also use that in each of these 4 contexts. So I think the question for us, I'm trying to move towards here, is you have, 100 tools and contexts. You have the one tool that I use. I think, if you thought about this, you probably say I have the 1 to 3 tools that I use all the time. Maybe, it's a combination of the ABC cargo type approach. Maybe that's kind of your core subset of tools. And there's a more general, should we be talking about 5 core tools and then applying them in practice, rather than talking about hundreds of tools and then saying, well, you could use them in these contexts. For me, which one is more important for which one? Again, this may be useful for the listeners that we have, if they get to this point. I think it would be good to get some feedback here about. I think one person actually did write in to say this. They'd rather know how to use 5 tools deeply than sort of many tools at a surface level.
Yeah, I need to go back and see what we had a comment like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had a comment there. So that's a very important question for us, really, around.
Yeah. And as you say, that it strikes me we can even look at that in a completely different way, because right now we've been really tool focused. But you can also be more process focused. I don't know just from a didactical point of view, whether that is easier or whether that makes it harder. But because usually when you are getting into something new, either you're, well, let's say if you're analyzing it something or constructing something, let's for the moment not look at the left half of your matrix. But if you do that, it's usually not just a single thing you're trying to accomplish. It's not there are some very simple problems or simple situations, and simple I use simple here in terms of simple versus complex rather than in any value judgment type of way. But there are some very simple ones where you go and you maybe use a tool, you understand something, and that's it. You now shelve it. Whatever you wanted to achieve is done. But very often you actually have a series of steps. You move into something that leads to something else, that leads to something else. You have dead ends somewhere. Sometimes you might have something that looks like a dead end, but once you continue your journey, you see that actually this also feeds into that, and so on and so forth. And this is a completely different way of structuring things, a different way of looking at things, rather than saying, okay, I have this one problem. What is this one tool? This is more about, okay, here's my journey. I sort of know what is the next step. What can I use, or how are different tools? I don't want to say how are different tools chained together for the journey, but because that sounds too much as in, oh, I pre-plan what tool to use, but it's much more like, oh, I'm feeling my way forward, and now for that problem I'm using this tool, for that problem I'm using that tool. And as you say, everybody has their own, or will develop over time, their own core set of tools that they will reach for again and again.
I think what you've got there,
Yeah.
I do actually really like that, because there's a couple of things that jump out at me. First of all, I like kind of Unix and Linux. That's been the thing that I've used as a platform all the time. And one of the distinctions between Unix versus, say, the Microsoft ecosystem is that in Microsoft you buy a big tool like Excel, and it kind of does everything for you. You kind of have this big monolithic architecture that does everything. While with Unix, it's always been small tools that are kind of, you will use the word chained together. I think in this case, it's more, the idea is that the output, from one tool can be piped into a different tool. So it's not kind of chained in this particular kind of way. It's more that you have a small tool and it does something, and then this something can be fed into any number of other tools. And so you construct a pipeline and you pipe the information from one into the next, as opposed to chaining them together in a sense that, because the word chaining feels like, you can't break them easily. The thing is, this can go into any one of these other transformation tools. So I quite like the concept here, because it makes a lot of sense to me that you enter into a situation, and one of the things that people often, so one of the questions I've had, and again, I don't want to sort of criticize tools here, because that isn't the purpose of this thing, but I do want to kind of find the edges of where these tools are. So let's say you are listening to a speaker and they're doing a presentation, and then you construct your sketch notes. Again, this is the point where I started. You've constructed these sketch notes, with a little heading and information and stuff in here. Some of these things look kind of very, very good. The work's art. So you do a sketch note, you find this kind of really pretty, carefully drawn, very artistic representation of the information in here, in what effectively could be put in a little frame and hung up on your wall. So, inscribing these things actually happen. People come and scribe something and they put it in a big thing on the wall. But then the question is, okay, but then now what? What happens next with that thing that you created? Is this the end result? Is it art? Is that actually the objective of this, where you've created this pretty picture? Or is it, so again, in the terminology of OR, is it a transitional object? Is it something that helps you kind of construct and make sense and hold sense for a small amount of time, which allows you to get the next stage of what you're doing? So again, there's a good example here. We spent an hour and 15 minutes last week talking about something that came out in the last, few minutes almost, into this sort of idea, that we had a process we were going to follow, and we had to distinguish between the known and the unknown in what we were trying to deal with. So that became then the input to the next conversation, where we formalized this model a little bit, and we talked about maybe this as a structure. So the last conversation is fed directly into this next conversation. They're not chained together, but it's almost like it's piped. We've taken the material and now we don't need to go back to the previous set of notes in the meeting. It's just there, but it is kind of this process of now we're constructing it. So I think this is really quite important as a way to articulate maybe what we're trying to do, which is the tools are not meant to be definitive end products in themselves. They are transitional objects. They are temporary sense-making devices that we use as we move from step to step to step, with the end result possibly. And again, I think this is something that has come through from just the conversation here. The end result is you have to present your information. When we're doing this, this is probably the end of everything we do. We have this conversation, we then present the information in the book, whatever else, but that's got to be, even understanding is not enough. Understanding implies that I now know it, but okay, shall we present it is probably the actual end result, where you can say, now it's done. Now I can abandon this work I've been doing and move on to the next thing.
I can build upon it. I can use it as a brick, sort of brick to build my wall. While you were saying that, I actually thought that with this piping, maybe instead of chaining things together, a better word might be configuring them, as in not pre-configuring, but sort of you have a configuration of intermediate steps, of intermediate work product almost, and as you're feeling your way forward by choosing the individual tools and piping them together, you're essentially creating a configuration, both a configuration of tools, which is and also a configuration of the work products or intermediate results, which is almost like a history trail. If you want to go back, you can look back at it. How did we get here? What worked? What didn't work? And so on and so forth. But yeah, I like your idea there. So from what I can see right now, I think there are potentially three intermediate work results. First of all, I really like your well, it's not really a circle, but your half circle that you started off with, and also your matrix. I think they are really good. They're really important. They really act like a map that, at least for me, makes things easier to construct. It's sort of what I started off with last time. It's a way of relating the concepts to one another, and at least for me, it makes it easier to think through. And I also like the again what we arrived at last in our conversation, the configuration and piping bit. Yeah, exactly. Um,
I think we could kind of talk about the terms as we use them, because again, if we, for example, if some of this conversation is inspired by the, the computer terminology, then configuration in computer terminology often relates to like an input file that's, it sets the configuration of how things happen. While I think what you're talking about is kind of the connections, the actual kind of how things are configured, the structure behind them. So I think it will,
yeah, exactly how things are configured. Yeah, in data analysis, you would call this a pipeline,
yeah.
which goes back to what you call piping, yes.
So I mean, I think the pipeline word is one we can look at. I agree that chaining is too fixed, but even this is quite technical because it comes from a certain structure. The other thing that you
Yeah,
mentioned
exactly.
is important.
People who might not be so deep into computing and data analysis, they might be put off by these words, and I don't know.
Exactly. The one other thing that I think is a really important word is the idea of, so again, this is in the literature, it's kind of recoverable. So with this kind of work, we can't prove that where we got to, is kind of true in any form. The social science work, or is kind of, these
Mm,
investigations are a process of discovery to some extent.
mm,
But how do we show that what we're doing is valid? Well, you said, we can show somebody and step through from the beginning product all the way through to the end. So at the end of this process, when we do write the book, we will be able to see exactly what the steps were, because everything we're doing is recoverable. The thinking is
mm,
on paper. It's also, in public. So it's auditable. You have this kind of recoverable sequence of how we got to where we got to, which I think is an important part
mm,
of making this more transparent. So again, if I just digress to Rich Notes for a second, one of the things about where Rich Notes is interesting for me is we have
mm,
this concept of, maybe we talk about the kind of cycle in the beginning. This frames the whole thing.
mm,
We have the overall kind of movement we're going through. We have this framework, perhaps,
mhm,
to talk about how we think about these tools. And then down here, we potentially have let's use the term configuration for now. How do we configure these tools and work
mm,
with them? So the original technique, one thing that happens is emergence, because you can write stuff on a higher level. You can see
mm,
how these things, are meta concepts to some extent, or they structure the underlying information that's there. It's grounded in information. So again, this is where,
mm,
one of the things where Rich Notes is helpful is this idea of layers, because quite often we think about writing just at certain, a piece of paper is a piece of
mm.
paper. You can't put the next level on top of it. Well, digitally you can.
Yes. And I think if I just stick with this configure or whatever we're gonna call it in the end part at the for a moment. Um, so one important takeaway from our discussion today is that the the tools, most of the tools they can. Well, let me step back a little bit further and let's start with the matrix. In the end, it's all about getting somehow to known and structured, or familiar and structured. You highlighted the word present. It doesn't necessarily need to be present, but it could also be doing something or whatever. But in our case, of course, we'll be presenting something, and a lot of times we'll be presenting. Yeah, it could be action, act, whatever. And the thinking tools, they can help us in no matter where we're coming from uncovering, constructing, analysis. And also, okay, several things. First thing, it is a gradual transition. We could stay for a long time in constructing and then sort of gradually move to analysis, and then from analysis gradually to present. We could, of course, move straight from construct to present. There will probably be a lot of uncovering to be done especially if you go into a completely new field, you want to read what other people's have written or said about that field or adjacent fields. So there will be some uncovering that helps you with the constructing, that helps you, and it's sort of, we have a configuration of, yeah, I don't, once you start adding too many arrows, then becomes confusing. But there is this, because one thing I always thought was too superficial is that most people, as we said before, they say, okay, there's one problem, one tool, solved. Or if they get any more complicated, they think in terms of cycles. Now, there's nothing wrong with a cycle. A lot of things are in cycles, but very often it's not really a cycle. It's a partial cycle. You're going through the same thing several times, then you're breaking off, then you might come back, you're iterative, you're going back and forth, and this pipeline, this configuration approach, that sort of captures that much better than a simple cycle or a simple problem tool solution kind of thing. But it also shows us that presenting is or anything, whatever it is in the known and structured territory, this is really the attractor. Whatever we're doing, the main purpose in the end is to get to that field in the matrix where things are familiar and they're structured. And all the actions that we're doing are really only aimed at facilitating the journey towards that state.
Yeah, I like the kind of phrasing there, because you talk about the gradual transition, and the arrows get confusing, but it is about movement. We are going from kind of where we are, and
Yes.
we're moving along this matrix. And again, the attractor is a nice term. That's where we're heading. At the end of it, we want to be in a position where we are able to take action on the basis of our understanding, or explain our understanding. There's something there, but it is, we now get it. We've gone from we don't know to we know and we can act. That's the journey we're going on.
Yes.
So this is good. I think we've reached now on our live stream now as well.
Yes, so we reached the 1 hour, and I think we also reached quite a good point where to break. So I would say, I think we discussed that we will probably do this weekly now, even though our original plan was to do it bi-weekly. Which means
the live stream every 4 weeks, weren't we? But now we do.
Oh, we were doing every 4 weeks, and we now move to every week. Is that correct? Or every 2 weeks?
We'll see there every 2
Oh
weeks.
yeah, last week we didn't meet. That's right. Yes. Sorry, you're completely right. So we're doing it every 2 weeks now instead of every 4 weeks. Yeah.
Again, hopefully we'll get some feedback from people if they're interested in if that timing is kind of right. But I think it does help to have the 2-week break, because these are long sessions. To get people,
they are long sessions, yes.
Watch them potentially, but also you need some time to reflect then on what's happening.
Yes.
But I think the end result of what we're still coming to here, if think about it kind of the same way you are, for me, individual tools, so the one-to-one is not that interesting. That I think leads to confusion. I also think that and something that's too flexible, is hard to enter, because that's one of the things I have with the rich notes approach. It could be so flexible that actually nobody knows how to use it. So these
Yes.
two are kind of the extremes, I think, are very structured and very kind of unstructured to some extent. But a good entry point may be a process entry point to say, let's kind of work our way through a process and then see how we would actually use some of these tools to help us, and how the output of one tool feeds into the next stage. It may be a good idea for us, again, in terms of designing the book, to have one example that unfolds through the entire book. So we could think about
Yes.
that potentially as a way, of an ongoing, a connected idea, but we refer that idea as in the exemplification throughout the book.
I would like that very much. I think this is something that is completely missing in the entire literature that I know of. It is very challenging because we need to find an example that most people will understand, will think it's interesting. But I think it's something very valuable. I think we should try to find something there.
Well, I have a suggestion for that one. I mean, just thinking about what people can value, but I think maybe quite a relevant question for most people is career strategy. How do we kind of work our way through the career that we're having, with the ups and downs, as we work our way through. So there is a journey we go through over time. I know personally I've had different points where I've certainly used tools to help me make some quite big decisions and choices. So that might be an interesting one, and it is quite relevant, I think, for a lot of people to kind of see, okay, how can I use it in practice right now? Well, you could use it tomorrow to understand your current situation, or think about some of these factors. So maybe we can wrap it around a career journey type approach. The same principle, we could select things from company examples or whatever, but I think we'll restrict the market, or the ability to kind of understand. Unless you've already been in a managerial position running a company, you might not understand certain things. Or if you haven't been a researcher, you might not kind of get into certain research level questions. But I think we understand how to kind of think through and construct a career.
Yeah, and it's definitely one possibility that we should keep in mind. You obviously already wrote it down. And then see whether we still think that's a good idea, or how our thinking continues to evolve as we think through this.
Well, this is the perfect place to kind of stop this conversation, because
yes, let's actually also hand it over to the audience. Those people who are watching, especially who are watching to the end. It would be really great to get your feedback here and your ideas, and maybe, yeah, and then whatever you can come up with, really, everything and anything is helpful. And as you said, this is really good place for stopping before we go getting into the next discussion. So thank you again, Karthik, and thanks everybody for tuning in. We will, unless you hear something different, we will meet again in 2 weeks on the 4th of July. And until next time,